Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. In this podcast, I will continue my discussion of the topic of Gaza. This is a very tragic situation, as I'm sure you all know, and I hope you have been following my own comments on the subject. I've been trying to make sense out of it as best I can. Admittedly, it is hard to make sense out of it. Why? Why would a powerful country like Israel, why would a country like Israel, which was basically born of the 20th century Holocaust, begin a 21st century Holocaust on people who were entirely unrelated to the one that victimized Jews? I cannot answer that question. What I do know is that many Israelis are referring to the Gazans as Nazis, which literally makes no sense. How in the world could the Gazans be seen as being Nazis? I would like to ask a question, I suppose, of some Israelis. How many of you have actually known a Gazan? If that question were asked of me, I could say yes, because my former dentist, who also became a very close friend, was herself a Gazan. And I would always show support for her. The reason why she is my former dentist is because she was my dentist when I lived in Kansas. And now, since I live in the Rio Grande Valley, a long way from her, she really can't be my dentist anymore, which I feel bad about. I honestly miss her. She was a great human being and a heroic human being and a woman who cared deeply about her family, especially her son, who at one point had cancer. And she quit her position as a professor of dentistry and opened up her own practice eventually with literally no money. Fortunately, it worked out for her, and she is now doing well, but she had no guarantees. So she is a Gazan that I have known and a wonderful human being, somebody that I was proud to call a friend. But how many Israelis have had that kind of relationship or anything close to it with Gazans? I doubt that many. If they did, they would not be referring to Gazans as Nazis. The ones who are behaving like Nazis, I'm not saying they are Nazis, that would be a serious historical error. You don't conflate two different historical events with one another. Contrary to what many people believe, history does not repeat itself, and I would question whether it even really rhymes. Different events need to be seen in their own particular historical context. But I think it does make sense to refer to the actions of the Zionist entity as fascist, even before there was a Zionist entity. When future Israelis went into the part of Palestine that was eventually to become Israel, mowed down homes, killed many people, and force the remainder into the occupied territories, allowing only a few to remain behind in Israel. A complete tragedy. My family was disconnected from the events of Nazi Germany. I am mostly from a Russian background. My family arrived in the US at the turn of the 20th century. So I was a part of a much earlier emigration of Jews into the US, not a part of the emigration which occurred after World War II. But still, even though my direct ancestors were not victims of the Holocaust, I feel as though they are my sisters and brothers. But I also see the Gazans as my sisters and brothers. To me, they are the same. They are Semitic brothers and sisters to me, and I love them all. The ones I do not love are Jewish Zionists. I do not love Jewish Zionists. Had a conversation on the phone about 24 hours ago, and I don't like bringing up these subjects with people I know because it usually results sometimes in losing friendships, but if not in anger. For some reason, and I don't know why, this person whose name I will not mention suggested to me that I spend a year living in Israel. The reason is unimportant, but that was her recommendation to me as a retired person. Ordinarily, I would not bring up my attitudes toward Israel and its treatment of the Gazans in a casual conversation. I would leave those subjects to serious conversations where I had time to explain my views. So I'm very cautious about doing this, partially because I think it's counterproductive. Because if I start talking about my views as a guy from an Ashkenazi Jewish background, what's going to happen? I am simply going to alienate the people I am talking with from me. So the conversation will have been of no use. This person who asked me this question is not of Jewish background at all. What her background is irrelevant. But I feel bad about that. I regret the conversation because I really did not have the time to explain to her why I felt the way I did. But she was offended. And she ended the conversation quickly, which is the worst thing to happen in conversations about this subject. The conversation should not have ended quickly. I should have had time to explain to her my views on the Israeli terrorist action on Gaza. Problem. When somebody asks me, or when she said directly to me, why don't you spend a year living in Israel? I've tried to reflect on why she would have asked me that. I still don't know. But she did. Maybe it's because I'm from Jewish ancestry. Perhaps. Perhaps. But I feel as though I may have lost a friend. And that's not something that I wanted to happen. Because when somebody asks me a direct question about Israel and Gaza, I am honest. I'm not going to beat around the bush. That's not the way I am. I am a direct person. I will say what is on my mind and try to say it as respectfully as possible. But when talking about Gaza, which is a very emotional issue for me, because even though I am not a Zionist, never have been, I am not an Israeli, I am an American of an Ashkenazi Jewish background who converted to another religion when I was 14, but I still regard myself as an Ashkenazi Jew. If somebody were to ask me, are you an Ashkenazi Jew? I would say yes. And if there was more time, I would clarify that by saying that, I am not saying that I practice the religion of Judaism, which is true. But do most American Jews practice Judaism? No. No. My parents did not practice Judaism. My sister has never practiced Judaism. In fact, I have known a lot of Jews, and very, very few of them practice or have ever practiced the religion of Judaism. But still, I feel bad about this event about a day ago with this woman who is a friend of mine and will hopefully still remain a friend, but I don't know. She was really angry. She was really, really angry that I said what I said. And I tried to be as delicate as I possibly could, because it does no good to hurt someone's feelings. It simply turns them off to you. They stop listening. And so there was no ability to have any impact on them from that point on. Again, it's very, very sad. Now, let me go back and I will read you a passage by Antonio Gramsci on subalternity, the subaltern, a contested term. Different scholars have different views on what it refers to. I have mine. Other people have different ones. So I will put on my glasses and read the passage to you. There's a lot on the subaltern in Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks. This is just a small sample. Subaltern groups are always subject to the activity of ruling groups, even when they rebel and rise up. Only permanent victory breaks their subordination, and that not immediately. In reality, even when they appear triumphant, meaning the subaltern appear triumphant, the subaltern groups are merely anxious to defend themselves, a truth which can be demonstrated by the history of the French Revolution, at least up to 1830. Every trace of independent initiative on the part of subaltern groups should therefore be of incalculable value for the integral historian. Consequently, this kind of history can only be dealt with monographically, and each monograph requires an immense quantity of material, which is often hard to detect. So that is the passage I wanted to read. There's a lot more. If you have not read the prison notebooks, you can Google it online. You'll find PDFs which contain excerpts from the prison notebooks, and you can read that and become familiarized with Gramsci's use of that term. Originally, the subaltern was a term used in Britain to refer to a person below the rank of captain. But Gramsci took the term and transformed it and used it to refer to people who are at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of society. People with literally no power over their own destiny. And thus, I describe the Gazans. Thus, I describe the Gazans. People who, by accident of birth, are living in a penal colony, having never been convicted of any offense. And when they try to stage a jailbreak under the auspices of Hamas, they were labeled as terrorists. And then the Israeli Defense Forces have gone in and have attempted and are attempting to destroy them, to drive them out of Gaza into an area of Egypt, which is now being prepared for them. But it too is a penal colony. They will not be free to leave it and travel around Egypt. They will be confined, and they have done nothing wrong. They have not broken the law. They are simply human beings who have been turned into enemies by the Zionist entity. And I must say, even though I am not an Israeli, even though my family, my immediate family, was not directly impacted by the Holocaust, I still, in my heart, feel a certain amount of responsibility. I realize that's not rational. I know it's not rational, but I do. I do. Because I am an Ashkenazi Jew. And I do believe that there is a kind of collective responsibility that people have. And so I feel that if Israelis are responsible for the treatment of Palestinians in such an inhuman way, that I, as a guy from Jewish ancestry, am responsible too, even though rationally I know I'm not, but I feel like I am. So my heart tells me one thing, and my mind tells me something else. But for the last 20 years, since I had my spiritual experience with Horia, the black-eyed maiden of white light, I have become a person of the heart, not of the mind. That does not mean I have abandoned rationality or the intellect. Far from it. I think about these things rationally all the time. And what bothers me is that I can see no reason in it at all. None. And that's what drives me back into my heart. Because although rationally, the treatment of the Gazans is totally nonsensical, in my heart, I feel a sense of, I don't know, death? Death? Brokenness? The brokenness of my heart. My heart is literally broken over the Gazans. They are above, I think, anyone else now in West Asia, the subaltern of that region. I'm not saying that there are no other subalterns, like in other parts of Palestine, for example, or parts of Lebanon, whatever. But right now, at this moment, the place that is being destroyed by people who share my blood, people who share my ancestry, are the Gazans. And the Gazans, like me, are Semites. They are my sisters and my brothers. And they are the sisters and the brothers to the IDF as well, even though they don't see it, which they don't, especially if they call them Nazis? Nazis? Of all things, Nazis. It is a tragedy to me beyond description. I wish I could make sense out of it, but the only sense I can make out of it is to see the Gazans as the personification of subalternity. They are the subaltern. They are the marginalized, the othered people right now. A culture being crushed and destroyed. And for what reason? None. None. There is no reason. I am a spiritual man. By spiritual, I don't mean that I necessarily always live a spiritual life, although I try. I mean that I have a spiritual orientation to life. I don't want to get into the specifics of my religion, as I've said before, but I do believe that the Israelis who are treating the Gazans like trash will suffer. Will suffer. God is a just God. He is a just God. Whether the Israelis care for the Gazans or not, as the Subaltern, God cares for them. God loves them. And God will reward them at a time of his own making. I don't know when that will be. Many Gazans have already died, and I believe in my heart that they have been transferred to a place of tremendous reward. I can't prove that, obviously, but that is what my heart tells me. That is what my dreams tell me. That is what Horia, the black-eyed maiden of white light, who gave me empathy 20 years ago, tells me. That they will be rewarded. And I wish that my friend who encouraged me to spend a year living in Israel and was apparently upset at what I said, even though I tried to be as delicate as possible, will not hold that against me. She is a good person, a very good person. So is her late husband, a good person. I was friends with him. He suffered a lot. But she took care of him. She loved him. And I hope that she can find it in her heart, if not to agree with me. I don't expect anyone to agree with me, but at least to accept my perspective as being a legitimate perspective, not necessarily the only one. So, with that said, my discussion of the Gazans as an illustration of subalternity will come to an end. I have nothing else to say, or nothing else to add, I should say, to what I have already said. Anything else would simply be vain repetition. And there's no need for that. So for the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day. and a better day tomorrow.